Generation X, typically defined as those born between the mid-1960s and early 1980s, developed their identity during a period of profound social transition. Unlike the baby boomers who grew up in an era of post-war optimism, Gen X came of age amid economic uncertainty, political scandals, and shifting family structures. This environment fostered a psychological orientation marked by skepticism, adaptability, and emotional self-reliance. One of the most influential factors shaping Gen X identity was the rise of dual-income households and increasing divorce rates. Many Gen X individuals experienced childhoods with reduced parental supervision, leading to the popular characterization of them as latchkey kids. Psychologically, this fostered independence at an early age, but also contributed to emotional guardedness and a strong sense of self-sufficiency. Gen X was also deeply influenced by cultural narratives of disillusionment. Events such as the Vietnam War's aftermath, the Watergate scandal, and the Cold War's lingering threat eroded trust in institutions. As a result, Gen Zers developed a worldview that questioned authority and resisted idealism, preferring realism and pragmatism over grand narratives. Media played a central role in shaping Gen X identity. Growing up with television as a constant presence, Gen X absorbed a steady stream of conflicting messages about success, morality, and identity. This media saturation contributed to a heightened awareness of contradiction and irony, which later became hallmarks of Gen X cultural expression. Psychologically, Gen X identity is often defined by an internal locus of control. Having learned early that external systems were unreliable, Gen Zers tended to place responsibility for success or failure on themselves. This reinforced resilience but also heightened anxiety around personal achievement and stability. Economic instability further shaped Gen X identity. Many entered adulthood during recessions or periods of job insecurity, weakening faith in traditional career trajectories. This led to a more flexible approach to work identity, where adaptability and transferable skills were valued over long-term loyalty to a single employer. Gen X identity was also shaped by being sandwiched between two large, culturally dominant generations. Overshadowed by baby boomers and later by millennials, Gen X often internalized a sense of invisibility. Psychologically, this reinforced self-definition independent of external validation. The absence of strong collective narratives pushed Gen X toward individualized identity formation. Rather than aligning with mass movements, Gen Zers tended to craft personal philosophies grounded in lived experience. This contributed to a pluralistic and nuanced understanding of identity. Emotionally, Gen X identity balances cynicism with quiet hope. While often portrayed as pessimistic, many Gen Zers maintain a restrained optimism rooted in realism rather than idealism. This psychological balance allows them to function effectively in uncertain environments. Ultimately, Gen X identity emerged from navigating instability with limited guidance. The psychological result is a generation that values autonomy, emotional control, and adaptability, forming an identity defined less by collective labels and more by personal resilience. Independence stands at the core of Generation X values. From an early age, many Gen Zers were required to manage responsibilities on their own, fostering a deep psychological commitment to self-reliance. This value influences their approach to work, relationships, and personal development. Pragmatism is another defining Gen X value. Rather than pursuing idealistic goals, Gen Zers tend to prioritize what is achievable and sustainable. This mindset reflects their formative experiences with economic downturns and institutional failure, which rewarded realism over optimism. Gen X places strong emphasis on authenticity. Having grown up exposed to mass media and marketing, they developed an acute sensitivity to insincerity. Psychologically, this results in a preference for direct communication and distrust of performative behavior. Work-life balance is a significant Gen X value, shaped by witnessing parental burnout and corporate downsizing. Unlike generations that equate identity with career, Gen X often views work as a means rather than an end. This perspective promotes psychological boundaries between professional and personal life. Gen X values competence over status. Rather than being impressed by titles or authority, they respect individuals who demonstrate skill and accountability. This value aligns with their skepticism toward hierarchical power structures. Loyalty among Gen Zers is conditional rather than unconditional. Having experienced layoffs and institutional betrayal, they prioritize reciprocal loyalty based on trust and fairness. Psychologically, this fosters selective commitment rather than blind allegiance. Gen X also values adaptability. Growing up during rapid technological and social change required constant adjustment. This reinforced a flexible mindset that views change as inevitable rather than threatening. Privacy is a deeply held Gen X value. Unlike younger generations raised on social media, Gen Zers tend to guard personal information carefully. This reflects a psychological need for autonomy and control over self-presentation. Cynicism, often misunderstood as negativity, functions as a protective value for Gen X. It allows them to critically evaluate information and avoid manipulation. This skepticism is psychologically adaptive in environments perceived as unstable or deceptive. Taken together, Gen X values form a coherent system centered on realism, independence, and integrity. These values support psychological resilience and enable Gen Zers to navigate complexity without relying heavily on external structures. The psychological legacy of Generation X is evident in their role as cultural and organizational stabilizers. Positioned between generations with contrasting worldviews, Gen X often acts as a bridge, translating values and expectations across age groups. In leadership roles, Gen X tends to favor decentralization and autonomy. Their skepticism toward authority leads them to empower others rather than impose rigid control. Psychologically, this reflects their belief in self-directed competence. Gen X parenting styles reflect their own upbringing. Many prioritize emotional availability and independence simultaneously, seeking to correct perceived deficiencies in their childhoods while avoiding overprotection. Technologically, Gen X occupies a hybrid psychological space. They adapted to digital tools as adults rather than natives, resulting in a balanced approach that values efficiency without full immersion. This moderates extremes seen in younger generations. Gen X's psychological influence is also visible in workplace culture. Their insistence on flexibility, remote work, and results-based evaluation laid groundwork for shifts later embraced by millennials and Gen Z. Emotionally, Gen X often models quiet endurance. Rather than expressive vulnerability, they demonstrate coping through action and problem-solving. This approach can appear detached but often reflects deep emotional regulation. Intergenerationally, Gen X may feel under-recognized, yet their influence is embedded in systems rather than slogans. Psychologically, this reinforces their comfort with working behind the scenes rather than seeking recognition. Gen X also contributes a critical voice in public discourse. Their skepticism tempers extremes, offering moderation in polarized environments. This psychological orientation supports dialogue over ideology. As Gen X ages, their values increasingly shape institutional memory. Their emphasis on adaptability and authenticity becomes essential in managing long-term societal transitions. In conclusion, the psychology of Generation X reflects a generation forged in uncertainty yet defined by resilience. Their identity and values continue to influence social structures quietly but profoundly, leaving a legacy rooted in realism, independence, and emotional strength. The emotional psychology of Generation X is deeply shaped by early exposure to uncertainty and emotional inconsistency. Many Gen X individuals grew up navigating households marked by absence, divorce, or economic pressure, which required them to mature emotionally at an accelerated pace. As a result, their emotional world tends to be structured around control, restraint, and self-management rather than open emotional dependence. A defining characteristic of Gen X emotional life is emotional self-containment. Unlike generations that openly externalize emotions, Gen Zers often process feelings internally before sharing them if they choose to share at all. This pattern reflects an adaptive response to environments where emotional expression was not always met with support or stability. Coping mechanisms among Gen X frequently emphasize action over articulation. When faced with stress, many Gen Zers prefer problem-solving, task completion, or withdrawal rather than verbal emotional processing. Psychologically, this approach reduces vulnerability but may also delay emotional release. Humor plays a critical role in Gen X emotional regulation. Often expressed through irony, sarcasm, or dark humor, this mechanism allows emotional distance from distressing realities. Rather than denial, this form of humor serves as a cognitive buffer, enabling Gen Zers to confront hardship without becoming overwhelmed by it. Gen X emotional resilience is closely tied to realism. They tend to anticipate disappointment and plan accordingly, which psychologically reduces shock when challenges arise. This expectation management creates emotional steadiness but can sometimes limit emotional openness or optimism. Trust is another central emotional theme for Generation X. Having experienced institutional failures and broken promises, Gen Zers are cautious in forming emotional attachments. Trust is built slowly and is often based on consistency over time rather than emotional intensity. Emotionally, Gen X values autonomy within relationships. They tend to resist enmeshment and prefer partnerships that allow individual space and independence. This reflects a psychological need to maintain identity and control within emotional bonds. Stress management among Gen X often involves compartmentalization. Work stress, family responsibilities, and personal emotions are frequently kept in separate mental categories. While this allows functional efficiency, it may also contribute to delayed emotional fatigue or burnout later in life. As Gen X enters midlife and later adulthood, emotional patterns are evolving. Many are beginning to reassess long-held emotional defenses, becoming more open to vulnerability and reflection. This shift reflects psychological safety gained through life experience and self-knowledge. In sum, the emotional world of Generation X is defined by strength developed through necessity. Their coping mechanisms prioritize stability, control, and endurance, forming an emotional architecture that is less visible but highly functional in navigating long-term uncertainty.